Tabea and
Hello,
Toby.
nice.
Welcome to Vancouver.
Thank you.
It's nice to be here.
It's wonderful to have you here, and it's so interesting to have something so different. I will tell you, now, you recorded this concert at the Stapleford Granary on the 27th of February, which is a long time ago. And things have changed considerably, I think, in your part of the world since you recorded this. Tabea, are you also in London now?
Right now, I'm not in London, actually, because the schools have reopened. I travel to the southwest of England once a week near Bristol to teach at this beautiful school called Wells Cathedral School. So I'm in Wells.
Oh, fantastic. And what, do you go there for a day at a time or 2 days or what?
Yeah, a couple of days, 2 days usually. So yeah, I've got enough pupils here to fit in for 2 days.
Tell me, what led you to play the recorder, Toby, and what led you, Tabea, and what led you?
I was going to say, that's a difficult question.
Yes, can you play the recorder?
No.
How did you land up there?
I started playing recorder when I was about 6, like I guess most children do at a young age. I mean, here in Germany and also in England, a lot of children start learning in a classroom when they're, primary school. I never did that, which maybe was lucky.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I had either lessons with just one friend, so 2 of us, and then I quickly changed to in one-to-one lessons. And I think that's why I sort of really had a lot of time with the instrument and with a teacher there, sort of just listening to me, and then fell in love with the instrument and all its possibilities. I should say instruments, because as I'm sure you know, there are lots of different ones.
Yes, of course there are. I mean, how many instruments do you actually have in your possession?
Around 30. Last time I counted. Yeah, it's like, it's like buying a grand piano in bits. Yeah, I mean, when I play with Toby, for example, I would usually play on Baroque or Renaissance instruments tuned to Baroque pitch, so sort of a semitone lower than a grand piano would be tuned to. But then sometimes I do play with piano or with modern strings, so I need to have instruments at that pitch, and it just accumulates that way.
That's fascinating. So in a way, the pitch is then determined by the instrument, as opposed to if you play a violin, you can actually tune it to a certain pitch.
Yeah, I need a different recorder for that.
That's fascinating. Now, I wrote a couple of questions down because I thought that the two of you really spoke fascinatingly about the program you were sending us, and a couple of things came up in that. So how did you come up with the notion of earworm?
Well, I've been sort of playing around with this idea for quite a while because, being a musician and playing a lot of music, listening to a lot of music, I naturally sort of often come home with sort of music still playing in my head, stuck in my head. And I'm sure we all know that. And it, it can be any type of music. It can be just a snippet or 2 notes sometimes, or sometimes more. So that's been sort of going through my mind for a long time. So I started a list of pieces I would put in a program like that, that were sort of personal earworms that I was sort of experiencing, but also pieces that we know from sort of looking back in history that were sort of earworms at that time. So a lot of the pieces in the program appear in lots of sort of music collections, often in different countries. It might be a song melody that pops up here and there with, slightly different text maybe, or a different sort of ornamentation by a composer, or maybe a composer's put it to different harmony. And that's sort of how you can guess, which pieces were popular and sort of spread like earworms, even in the Renaissance period or Baroque period.
And actually, Toby, you at one point said that an earworm could be a rhythmical thing rather than a melodical.
So I think the chacons or the chaconas that we play at the beginning of the concert are a good example of that. Because for me, an earworm, it's probably more often a melody. You might walk around or when you're cooking, or it happened to me this morning. I don't normally sing in the shower, but this morning I started sort of humming. I realised I was humming. It was actually a Dowland song, but not one of the ones in our programme, a different one that I recently performed with someone else. And I thought, oh, interesting, that's it. And those ones were melodic. But the other thing I do is sort of when you're walking around and you get that sort of rhythm in your head. In the case of the chacon, and that really is a rhythmic one. It's not a melodic one because you can change. You can take the melody out. It's all about the rhythm there in that case, rather than the melody for me, anyway.
Yes, that's fascinating. One of the pieces you played, and I can't remember which, and don't kill me, but at times the recorder in that particular context of what you were playing sounded like a penny whistle, and which leads me to my next question. It's perhaps if I asked you, okay, let me get this right. I remember once being in a restaurant with my husband, and there was a dessert on the menu, and the server came by, and I said to the server, what is this dessert? He tried to explain it rather unsuccessfully, and I said to him, what does it taste like? And he looked at me and he said, lady, if you tell me what a banana tastes like, I'll tell you what the dessert tastes like. So my husband gave him a huge tip at the end because he absolutely shut me up. My question to you is, it's a sort of a similar question. Does the Baroque flute sound a whole lot different than a recorder?
I would say yes, but then I'm biased. I think the big difference between a Baroque flute, sort of played sideways, and a recorder is that on the Baroque flute, you produce the sound, or you have direct influence on the sound by what you do with your lips. So, as you know, I sometimes try getting a sound out of the flute, and I always fail. So you have to really work out your, as we call it, embouchure. So you're sort of the lips and how they blow into the breath into the instrument, and that creates a sound. Whereas on the recorder, you have you don't do that. You sort of just blow in, and all the sound is sort of produced as the breath goes through here, and then it's split at this sort of window here. So I think that way the recorder has a very direct sound, like a whistle, as you said earlier. And the flute is often, I find, a bit more sort of mellow, maybe, or more gentle, or it can be at least.
It's interesting because I was thinking how would I describe it as well, and the direct was the word that I had as well. I think the recorder, to me, feels like a more direct sound if I'm playing with one as well.
Yeah,
it's more focused.
Yes,
right. I don't know if this is. I don't know the sort of technical aspects that much, but if you imagine the air for the Baroque flute it's an area sound. It's like the air is sort of wider, whereas the recorder is a bit narrower and more focused. And obviously, both of them can sound great. I should hedge my bets there.
Tabea, so at what point did you know that this was going to be your career in your life?
Oh, I would say pretty early on. I mean, I was very lucky growing up. I got to, playing lots of youth ensembles. I also played the cello, so I got to play in symphony orchestra with the cello. And in the music school, where in the town where I grew up in Germany, we often travelled. So we would go abroad. We went to Malaysia or Singapore or
really?
New York. Yeah.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Münster, so northwest Germany.
Yes.
And
isn't there a cheese named from there?
It's not from this Münster. I think it's
Oh.
Münster, well, the term Münster just is a type of cathedral, I think.
Oh, right.
So you have sort of Münster,
yes.
city, sorry. Anyway, but so I really enjoyed all the traveling, and playing with my friends. And so I think when I was, teenage, I just thought, oh, this is a great life. I want my life to be like that.
So did you stay with the same teacher until you went off somewhere to study?
Yes, I had the same teacher for about 10 years. So I didn't start with her, but then had lessons with her in Münster for about 10 years, and then went off to study.
And where did you go off to study?
I went to Frankfurt, sort of central Germany first, which was really great. I did a sort of teaching degree as well as a musical performing degree, and then came to London. And actually, Toby, we might have met at the Guildhall.
Yes.
Music and drama, where I was also for a year, and Toby was studying there.
That's funny. That was a long time ago. I don't think I'd realised you were a student there. I remember meeting you at Guildhall a few times, but I thought, because I knew you were at the Royal Academy afterwards, and I think in my head you had just been coming over to Guildhall to play in some groups and things like that. I had forgotten that you were actually enrolled there as well.
And what led you to your life, Toby?
Well, I like a lot of lute players, but not all of them, I suppose. I played the guitar a lot, and then a little bit later on, when I was studying at music college, I had worked out that I liked a lot of music from the Renaissance and the Baroque period, and I liked to play it on the guitar, in transcription. And so in my second year of music college, so when I was about 20, 21, we had an option of, do you want to take up a second study instrument? And I've always really loved jazz. I still do. I listen to jazz all the time. And I was trying to decide, do I want to try and have a go at jazz guitar, or I can have a go at playing the lute? Because I know I like lute music, and I sort of had this vague idea that it was something that people did. And when I played lute music on the guitar, my teacher would say, I'll go and listen to this recording of someone playing it on the lute. And that will somehow help you to sort of work out the kind of sound world you're interested in. And the thing that made up my decision for me were two things. One, someone who was a little older than me, had studied the guitar there for longer, said, oh, there's a lute teacher called David Miller there, and he's really, really good. So if you sign up for lute lessons, put him down as your preferred teacher. So that made me feel a bit more confident about doing that. And secondly, one of my friends was a really good jazz guitarist, and I used to go and hear him play. I remember hearing him play, and I just thought, he's so far ahead of me. If I start having lessons now, I'll leave that to him. He can do that. I'll listen, and I'll do something else. So I signed up to lute lessons. I had a great teacher. He would lend me instruments for months at a time and lend me music. And it took me years and years, really, to work out that actually I like it. And I like playing the music, and I like the kind of work that it means you can do. As a classical guitarist, my life was a little bit lonelier. I spent a lot of time in a practice room by myself, which I still do now, but now I have a little bit more opportunity to play with other people. So that was a big part of it for me.
Is it very different physically playing the lute and the guitar?
For me, the left hand, not so different, and the right hand is very different. So the left hand of finding your way around the frets and finding the right string and the chord shapes, there are differences, but the difference is all in your head. It's getting used to different tunings and things like that. So it's knowing, right, where am I going? But for the left hand, the actual technical aspect of it is very similar. For the right hand, at first it's similar, but then you realise if you want it to really sound good, or hopefully sound pretty good, then you really have to change a lot from how you play the guitar, because the whole way the strings work is very different. The main difference is that they're a lot less high, they're lower tension, so they have less tension in the string. So you can't push through the string in the way that you can with a modern guitar, where you can really dig into them. And the more force you apply, often the better sound you get and the clearer, nicer sound you get. Whereas with the lute, it's the opposite. You have to play very lightly, and you have to sort of bounce onto the strings. Because if you play too hard, then the strings vibrate, twang against each other, and it makes a very unpleasant sound. And it doesn't sound like that big a difference, but it takes years and years to try and sort of get your head around that one.
So would you say that when you play the guitar now, do you have to kind of break yourself in to get back to the lute?
Yeah, I mean, these days I don't play the guitar that much. I do a little bit. And when I do, I can pick it up and make quite a nice sound quite quickly. And I think, oh, this is nice. But if I really stick with it, I realise that the fact that I haven't practiced it a lot for years means that I've definitely sort of lost something of the fluency there. Whereas when I pick up a lute, that period of adjustment, of changing your technique to find the right sound, the more you do it and the more years I play it, the quicker that period of adjustment is from having played another instrument or having done something else. It's still there, but you can do it quicker.
The other thing that you said that piqued my interest, and it's because I'm currently reading, I wish I could remember, I should have taken the book and looked it up, a fascinating sort of life story of Beethoven. It's written by a professor at Cambridge, I think, and it's called Beethoven in 9 Pieces. And she looks at his life through, I'm now on she starts with the septet, and now I'm on the Kreutzer Sonata. But in that, of course, at the beginning came up the issue of patronage, which you referred to in the Dowland. The point being that, of course, Beethoven was without patronage. I mean, he had people who helped him from time to time, but it was very different than Handel, Haydn, and, I guess there's a difference between patronage and a composer working in the court of someone, right? Or is that also patronage?
I think there is something different there. I mean, I know more about the latter than the former, if you like, because these days I spend my life in the 17th century, in my head at least. And so if you take the example of John Dowland, who famously didn't always get the job that he wanted in England. He did eventually get employment at the court in England, but he wanted it much earlier. And I think he wanted a slightly different kind of role. He was sort of given one, I think, slightly grudgingly eventually, because he was really such a big deal by that point, and his music had travelled all across Europe, and he was one of the most famous composers in his style of the whole period. So eventually I think they couldn't really avoid it, but we don't really know exactly why he didn't get it beforehand. It possibly had to do with his religion. When he was a younger man, he had been in the household of the ambassador in Paris, and so he had converted to Roman Catholicism, which turned out, if you wanted to hang around the court in England, that was not the best course of action around the end of the 16th century, which, I mean, I joke, but it really, it could go either way. If he'd hung around another few years, that would have, suddenly that would have been a great move for your career. But so he certainly, at least on one occasion, thought that was the reason. But there is also some suggestions that he might have been quite a difficult character. I mean, he was famously the melancholy, always doleful guy, and we don't know really how much of that is just in the music and how much of that was sort of performative and how much he was actually quite difficult. There is some suggestion, we don't know a huge amount about his life, but from what we do know, there is some suggestion that it might have been he might not have been the easiest character always to work with as well. Certainly when he in searching for employment, he was in Denmark for a time at the court of Christian IV, and there's something in when he is let go from the court that suggests it wasn't his music making that they were dissatisfied with when he was let go, but it was something else in his character.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. And of course, you can never be sure about what it was.
That's right. And it's hundreds of years later, who was right, who was wrong? Maybe it's not impossible to think that he was actually a sort of pioneer and that he had everything right, really, and that they did him wrong. Or it could be the other way around. He might have been the most difficult character imaginable, but the most amazing musician. There's certainly been a few of those throughout history.
So when you travel, both of you, say, Tabea, you say you go to America. Do you go on recital tours, or do you go and join early music festivals, or how does it work?
Mostly sort of recital tours where I would come over for an extended period of time as to avoid, too much travel back and forth.
Yeah, of course.
It's also important, and then sort of play recitals either with a musician or two that come over with me from the UK, for example, or next year, for example, collaborating with musicians who are based in America. And some of those concerts might be part of sort of early music series or festivals, but predominantly it will be other existing concert series that we sort of tour.
And what about you, Toby?
I'm probably slightly different in the sense that the vast majority of my work takes place in this country, or over in Ireland, or somewhere a little bit closer. And when I do travel, it tends to be mainly in Europe, over to France or Italy or Germany. But I'm quite happy about that.
Stop right there. Obviously, this is all going to be very difficult for you going forward with Brexit, isn't it?
It's a little bit early days that we don't really know quite. It seems unbelievable to say it, given that it's all already happened. But we don't actually really know how difficult it's all going to be yet. But it's definitely not going to be easier. We know that for sure. It's going to be more difficult. I mean, I'm luckier than some in the sense that still most of my work is in this country. So friends of mine who really have relied on freelance work on the continent, I think they're the ones who are going to suffer the most, because even if it's only a little bit more difficult, when the reality is you're competing with people who don't have that extra level of difficulty, it obviously puts you on the back foot. Whereas even for me, when I do work abroad, it tends to often be something that's organised by people here, but we go over to Germany and do a concert, for example, or we go to France and do a concert. And that, I think, is more likely to carry on because there's no alternative, really. We have to go and travel, and we have to go and play our music. Whereas if you're organising a concert and you are in France and you want to book some musicians, the tragedy of it for us now is I think you're much less likely to look at musicians in the UK unless they happen to be lucky enough to have a passport from somewhere else, as many of my friends and colleagues do. I married an Irish woman, but because we live here, I don't have an Irish passport yet.
And Tabea, do you have a German passport?
I do. I'm quite lucky I've got a German passport, but I've also lived in the UK for over 6 years, coming up to 7 years now, which means I've got settled status, which should mean that I can still go back and forth without too much hassle.
Yes. But let's say if you want to play in Spain or Italy, would you do that with your German passport? Would that make it much easier for you?
Probably, yes.
You wouldn't have to go through the same sort of paperwork.
No, I don't think so. But as Toby said, even though this has been going on for years, we still don't really know what it's going to be like, because so far nothing has really changed.
Yes, of course.
Also, we haven't been able to travel anyway. So.
Well, I mean, I would imagine that where you are at this point in time, there's more cause for optimism with regard to the COVID situation than there is here or in many countries in Europe at the moment.
Yeah, we seem to have, we got the really bad part out of the way early. Not by any great planning, I think, but I don't want to get too political, but I think by sort of governmental incompetence, it meant that our second wave went straight into the third wave. Yes. But it means that what we have been really lucky is the vaccination program has gone really well here. And so that coincided with us having been in lockdown for quite a long time and the weather getting better. So things at the moment are looking up, but I don't want to sound too optimistic in case a month's time.
Exactly. I mean, you've sort of, as you open up, so you have to wait and see how things evolve, right?
Exactly.
At least here where we are, everything has been closed since, all the concert halls and theatres have been closed since March a year ago, and nothing has reopened at all. So we haven't had this sort of on again, off again. But, what's the point of complaining when there's not a hell of a lot we can do about it at this point? We can do is hope. Well, thank you, you two. And Let's hope that the future is way, way brighter and busier for all of us. We love the sunshine, we love the blossom on the trees, but we want the music in rooms where we can work with people and share the experience. Thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure, and thank you for having us. We really enjoyed recording the concert. It was great, and it came at a time where I was really thankful to have something like that to do. So thank you.
I'm so glad. Bless you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.